Hey, welcome back to another Bitcoin Reformation podcast. I'm Ben Haupt, and as always, joined with my friends David Rufner and Jared Townley to talk to you a little bit more about Bitcoin. But first, quick check-in. David, how are you and the Rufner clan doing?
We're good. Winter just finally gave up here on the mountain here in Southern California, which means summer and fire season's just around the bend. It's for this Midwesterner having transplanted to California. It's like a really slow-moving tornado, guys, when it's fire season and there's one nearby. But no, we're well. The college kid comes home next weekend. I've got some travels coming up. It's just sort of all things end of year sports. We have a senior in high school getting ready to graduate. So all the fixings that go with that, but we're well. How about you, Jared?
Things are going well here. I think the biggest thing, we're into spring. Summer feels like it's right around the corner. So we've been outside more, which is just so much fun. My youngest loves to be outside. And when she's outside, that means she's happy, which generally means we're happy too inside. But one of the greatest things that's happened this past week or so, we were just sitting around playing together, and I started singing "Jesus Loves Me," and then here my daughter, who's not even 3 yet, is singing "Jesus Loves Me," and it was, as pastor, as dad who wants her to follow Jesus more than anything else, the best thing I think that's happened, or the best thing I've seen in a long time. And it was funny. We were FaceTiming my wife's mom, and showing off the kid tricks, and said, "Hey, Zoe, can you sing Jesus Loves Me?" And she started singing, and then Emily's mom goes, "Hey, did she learn that at Time for Two at school?" I was like, "No, we're doing this at home, because this is how important that stuff is. We're forming her here in our house." It was just such a cool thing. And as a dad who wants that for her most of all, I don't think it gets much better. So things are really well here, celebrating those things. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, things are well here. It's been a whirlwind. Now the news is officially out that I've taken a new role with PLI, Pastoral Leadership Institute, and that means house hunting season and all kinds of stuff. So that's been a little bit of craziness for the Haupt family, and for me. I'm still finishing out my sabbatical, and starting this podcast was one of those projects. So that's been a lot of fun to be a part of, and I've thoroughly enjoyed sabbatical. I'll probably be a while till I get another one. So enjoying every last minute that I can. But for the family, this has been a big transition. My kids have only known Concordia Seminary as the place where they've grown up. Really, my older son knows a little bit, remembers a little bit of our first place in Georgia where he was born, but my younger son doesn't remember that at all. And so this has been a real faith journey for them. And so yeah, it's a time of transition, but that's just part of life in the world, especially life in the 21st century. So. Hey, so we're going to dive into the philosophy of Bitcoin today, but don't worry, listeners, viewers, if you're not a philosopher, I'm going to try to keep this as close to the ground as I can, and as down to earth, so to speak. So we'll be talking about lots of analogies. I'll throw out some fancy terms and blah, 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 but really what I'm interested in is the question, what actually is Bitcoin? We've been addressing a lot of different topics on this podcast, but one that perennially comes up as we're talking with friends is what actually is it? And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different answers to that question today. But first, I just want to pause on that question of what is Bitcoin, or the more general question, what is this, or what is that? It's a question that kids love to ask, right? It's a question, we're all Lutheran pastors as hosts of this podcast, and we know very well this question, what is that, which is in Luther's Small Catechism, was ist das? It's the simple question that a kid asks when they point to something. So, Jared, David, you're both dads. You're both outdoorsmen. I'm wondering if either of you have had an experience where Jared's kids are a little bit younger, so this is maybe very fresh, or David, this was maybe a few years ago. If you have a memory of walking through the woods or on a trail or something, and your kid says, "What is that?"
That's like every day. It's the what is that and why, the whole what is that, daddy? And then, well, I have to go to work. Why? Or, we can't do that right now. Why? But to me, the coolest part of all of these things is asking. I always try and say, hey, what do you think it is? What does it look like to you? Because some of the times you think your kids know these things, but they just want you to say it for them. But there's not really necessarily anything that sticks out or like a funny sort of memory. But I will say that I think seeing the world through a 2.5-year-old's eyes and just the like wide-eyed curiosity is something to behold, because I mean it's as simple as the what is that food that I've never seen? What is that object that I have no idea what it is? That every single thing is somehow this new novel, and that it's actually exciting, right? That it's not a fearful thing, but it's something that is actually to be enjoyed, to be pursued, to continue to pursue after. And so it's kind of this like, it's fun to see it, but then it's also this fresh reminder that like, hey, there is a lot in the world that I don't even know. There's a lot that I might not even know how it works too. And so maybe my contribution to this part is, as you hear about this stuff, I invite you to have that open mind, right? To be like a 3-year-old and say, what is this? Because I want to learn, and try and not have sort of those negative baggage, if you want to use that language, come into it.
Jared, I love the reminder. I mean, our oldest is 20. Well, I'll go ahead and say I'm in a bit in a hurry for him to find the right girl, be married. I'm ready for the grandkids. I'm ready for that cycle of the young ones peppering me with questions all over again. I really am. You can't push these things along. They'll come in due time, but I'm there. I maybe am at the other side of things. I have, we have 4 kids, 20 down to 14, which means I live with 4 experts on all things everywhere, right? So I deal with that. So sometimes I have to dish out a little humility. But I am thinking to a few Saturday nights ago, some friends over, 2 other families, our kids are there. We called some of the teenage boys in, and we asked them, what is this? Particularly concerning the lingo of the day. What does mid mean? What does low key mean? And I'm not even going to butcher the others. And they would share it, and then I would try it back on them. So does it get used like this? And gentlemen, I couldn't nail a single one. I mean, I thought I could understand what they were saying to me, but I couldn't give it back. So yeah, I live with local experts, and I'm the one now very often asking them about like a cultural good. What is this?
I love it. When you're not a part of the community, and this community has certain lingo that they use. David, as you were talking about getting ready for grandkids, I was thinking, man, we're getting old, dude. We're not the young anymore with all the latest cool lingo.
Nope.
We're certainly not Gen Zers. So we want to take that question of what is it, what is that, what is this, the curiosity that comes along with from children. We want to apply that to Bitcoin, and we assume that if you're following along with us and you're making this journey with us to try to figure out what Bitcoin is, you have a little bit of that childlike curiosity yourself. So we're we're going to explore a couple of different views of kind of as I've put some things together. I've read a bunch of articles. I love to read. You can kind of see that in the background. So I'll try not to get too geeky, but I can't help it. That's just who I am. So there's a bunch of philosophy debates. If you do have some background in philosophy, then you might be interested in these debates about, is it a substance or is it a subject? Is it a subject or is it an object? Is how do we know about something? Is it something that we sense or is it something that we experience? Should we try to understand what a thing is through a theological lens or a philosophical lens or a scientific lens? There's all these debates out here, but I'm going to try to boil down to three different views of Bitcoin that I've been seeing as I've been watching the space and trying to listen to people ask the question, what is Bitcoin, and try to give an answer to it. So I'm going to throw out some what I'm some of these terms are kind of my own, and some of those are from others, but we're going to look at three views: the social construct view, the ownership view, or what I'm kind of going to tentatively call the technical view. But when we talk about the technical view, we'll still be following some philosophers. So let's break that down and get into kind of a down to earth view of this. So let's start with the social construct view. This is all about what other people out there say about Bitcoin, and it's especially about when you're thinking about what is Bitcoin. This answer typically talks about how do people now relate to it. So how do you as a listener relate to this phenomenon of Bitcoin? And there have been a lot of answers that have been given as to what is Bitcoin that kind of take this social construct view. So I'll tell a little story that kind of will demonstrate my age of growing up. I was around when Chuck E. Cheese was a real thing. Now we have Freddy Fazbear and Five Nights at Freddy, and it's kind of this internet sensation horror show. If you don't know about Five Nights at Freddy's, look it up. It's kind of terrifying. But I was around when Chuck E. Cheese was a real thing, and I remember going to Chuck E. Cheese, and you'd put usually a $5 bill into the machine, and it would spit out all these coins, right? These tokens, and these tokens, I would be like, oh, we should save these. These are going to be worth a lot of money someday, because I knew that my coin collection was starting to be worth things, and my parents would tell me, no, those are not going to ever be worth anything. They're only worth something inside Chuck E. Cheese. And that was hard for me to get my mind around. So you mean there isn't any inherent worth to this token? I can only use it for this playing this game, right? Throw in a skeet ball or whatever. And so the idea of a Chuck E. Cheese token is that it has value because, frankly, because Chuck E. Cheese Corporation said, we will accept this little thing, this token, in exchange for playing a game. And outside of Chuck E. Cheese, it's worth absolutely nothing. Is Bitcoin like that? Is it like Chuck E. Cheese tokens? That's one view. I'm going to definitively say no, but we'll get there. There are a lot of different ways that that people have talked about Bitcoin in this kind of social construct view. So let me throw it to David and Jared. Think of any examples of this kind of social construct view in addition to it's kind of like a Chuck E. Cheese token.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've heard even people who like Bitcoin sort of use this idea too, right? It's the some people will say it only has value because you value it. It's because you think it's good,
Yep.
and I don't think it's good, so I'm not going to assign value to it. And then what a lot of Bitcoiners even do will say something like, well, the dollar only has value because you think it has value. It's all because we agree that $1 is $1 and 10 is 10. And those I think are points that even people within the Bitcoin world use too to talk about Bitcoin as value, or at least what it
Yeah,
is.
fair enough.
But at the same time, I think it's one of the most easily dismissible things, right? Because if it is truly just a social construct, then it's really easy for you to say, well, not for me, and kind of move on. And there's not much. Well, you can't say, oh, well, you're wrong. It's we have to go somewhere else. We have to look somewhere else to find out, sort of have a thing to claim what it is.
I think that's a great point. I have used analogies like this to try to. It's usually first to try to take down what is a dollar and why is a dollar worth something. Um, but yeah, you're totally right. I've used it. We'll talk about why maybe it's not a very strong argument. David, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think what's interesting to me, what my ears perked up to in your question was how, when it comes to difficult things, we like to overly simplify and then absolutize or turn things into absolutes. So the word that came to mind for me, as you said is only. It is only this sort of construct of meaning and value that we place on it. That'd be simple if we could find something that's only this or only that. But very few things are only this or only that. Now, having said that, I'd go back to your question and say there is merit there. I mean, you can't go too far in the Bitcoin world, or I don't know, the right concert ticket, the wrong concert ticket. I mean, I feel like it was what is it, the Swifties, Taylor Swift. They're trying to get their hands on tickets last year. There's FOMO, there's fear of missing out on this tour, right? And that fear of missing out in a limited amount and lots of people coming to it does pump the value. Or my daughter, suddenly I'm literally in the truck on the way home yesterday with her, listening to her new artist. I don't know, Benson Boone. Have you heard this name? I don't know. Anyways, listening to Benson Boone, not for me, but I'm loving my daughter as we listen to it. She wants to go to one of those concerts. And even now I'm dead, ready to absolutize. Eden, the only reason did you hear that? The only reason is because sort of the viral nature of young girls your age liking him and his music and wanting the tickets. But it just doesn't work that way only. It just doesn't work that way. Now, the positive case is that to some greater or lesser degree, it does work that way. Sort of this human, emotional hive. What are we talking about? What's the water cooler buzz? Although I don't even know. I don't know if I've ever stood around a water cooler with people, but some people understand that. Like, what are we talking about? Whether in person, in the workplace, or over the socials, such that it's the hype, and we are granting it value with our attention. We really are, and some of those things end up being kind of ephemeral. They're here today, gone tomorrow. And some of them are more lasting. But I'll stop there. I think that's what my ears perked up to. You, of course, already gave us the conclusion, Ben, that you're going to lead us to where you do not think it's this, that it is something very real. But I'd be curious, does that mean you deny the other side of it, the kind of the value we subjectively give to it with our attention?
No, yeah, I think this is super helpful. Both of you are highlighting that this argument is used a lot by the Bitcoin community sometimes to try to give some understanding to what Bitcoin is, and yet I think Jared pointed out that it's an easily sidestep thing. Well, I mean, it's basically relativism, right? What's good for you is good for me, but I'm not interested. So you have your you have your money, I'll have my money, and we can kind of both just coexist. And I think all three of us would probably say Bitcoin has a little bit bigger vision than that, and if you have dollars in your pocket, Bitcoin actually set out um, to relate to the United States dollar system and the British pound system, right? And so Bitcoin does not see itself as relative. It doesn't see itself as well. This is just for you know uh, people collectors, right? I'm not a Swiftie, so a ticket to Taylor Swift doesn't, I wouldn't give you 50 cents for it because I don't want to go to see Taylor Swift, right? Um, Also, another thing that's kind of interesting about that analogy between a ticket and Bitcoin is that after the event, that ticket is essentially only worth the paper that's printed on. It might be it is to some people eventually might become a collector's item. I don't know, a ticket to some famous Beatles concert probably is worth a lot of money now to some people. But it's all about this kind of social construct relative, who's willing to pay some money for it. And I do think that Bitcoin has some value propositions that are kind of like that. But I want to talk a little bit about some of these maybe more pejorative um, comparisons that I think are social construct views that some of the opponents of Bitcoin have used to essentially say, well, to answer the question, what is Bitcoin? People who really don't like Bitcoin have come up with some pejorative examples, and maybe this is a good time to throw it back to you all because I think you both know.
Sure. We already brought up one in a previous show, and then it came up again. Neil Kashkari, part of the Federal Reserve, one of the regional Federal Reserve banks, was on a talk show, a morning program, just I think a month ago, and again referred to it as like Beanie Baby hype, right? So it's like a trip to Hobby Lobby. All the raw goods are there. In the moment, none of them are worth much, but they've been assembled. They've been given a label, a brand. We're told that it's a limited run. You kind of tread that ground with us before, I think, Ben, saying, yeah, how do you know that, right? Really limited run? If they're making money on it, let me tell you, they'll run some more, or they'll change a tail color, who knows? But they'll have fun giving you what yesterday the pieces and parts were worth nothing. And at some point, it'll trend back towards that because right now it's just pure social craze. So Beanie Babies, another one that's brought up, you'll hear it, and this is a placeholder for many of these, is tulip mania, referring to the historic moments. I forget when it was, 1600s,
1634 to 1637. I have a chart that I pulled up.
Fantastic. Tulip mania. But just listen to that, and I won't give all of it away, but it was like 3 years plus, sub 4 years, tulip mania. We can see these sorts of manias run through. In fact, there's some negative social trends that run through also virally, truly like a negative, terrible virus, but they run their course relatively quickly. And they're laid along this notion of, and this pejorative, as you said, of tulip mania. So I suppose there's other tulip manias as well. Maybe I don't mean to put you on the spot, Jared. What else do we have?
I mean, I think game stocks, everybody remembers that from a couple of years ago. Go a little bit further back, and you have the internet stock bubble, stuff like that, the dot-com bubble. I mean, those are all sort of the same craze where everybody piles in, everything's going up, and then sometime it all comes down and it's dead forever sort of thing. I think another one, when I think about sort of the pejorative phrases around it. At least this is what I would. Bitcoiners use this maybe in jest to people, but some people call it magic internet money.
Yep.
And sort of this like joke, like, oh, there's those crazy people with their fake internet money doing this weird thing, kind of a dismissive thing. Some people call it just like internet money for criminals, criminals and drug dealers and sex traffickers. We could talk all about that some other time, but again, sort of the negative dismissal because of maybe who they think uses it or what they view it as. But those are the ones that at least come to mind for me.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and we're gonna come back to magic internet money. I think that's a great one, and we'll talk about a philosopher who kind of takes that argument apart. Another one is so Jamie Dimon, the head of what is he the head of?
What is he the head of?
It's JP Morgan Chase, right?
Yeah, the largest bank in the world. He calls Bitcoin a pet rock. There was this phenomenon in the 1970s where they literally put a rock in a box and they made cute little like air holes so that the rock could breathe. And they charged $4 for these pet rocks, and people bought them. And so, it's just a rock from off the ground, but this guy came up with this idea. Let's sell rocks, and so he had kind of a cute idea, and he put them in this box, and it was all kind of marketing. But really, the only reason that pet rocks had any value was because it was a fad, it was a bubble, it was kind of the latest thing. All the kids had to have them, and peer pressure, and voila! All of a sudden, people are buying rocks in a box for $4 that you could just pick up on the side of the road. So Jamie Dimon thinks that Bitcoin is a little bit like that, and I think there's really good reasons to not trust that answer. And there's all kinds of political reasons, but I'm interested in just like, is that a good argument? And I don't.
I think it's a worthy consideration. It's a worthy objection. In other words, pet rocks exist.
Yep.
You've now triggered for me in the 80s the Cabbage Patch dolls at Christmas time,
right?
And the run for the store that the parents did. Yep. Turns out some of those are actually probably collector's items today, but the point is it ran literally like a tulip bulb phase, like tulip mania. Yep. It was here today, gone tomorrow very quickly, just like the Cabbage Patch Kids, these sorts of things. So knowing that we succumb to these sorts of things altogether, maybe not every one of us, but altogether, that these things run their wave, knowing that happens, it's an understandable objection. It's maybe even a healthy objection to make and then kick the tires on.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is what philosophy is at its best, is discussing arguments. I mean, you read any of Plato's works, there are all these dialogues, right? Kind of reads like a modern day or an ancient version of a podcast, and they're just discussing, is that a good argument or not, right? So here's another one. Warren Buffett, he has a famous comparison. He said that Bitcoin is rat poison squared, which I don't know exactly what that means. But as I plunked around and kind of read a little bit of the context, he basically said, look, if Bitcoin, if an investment, so he's talking very broadly, if an investment doesn't make something like General Motors makes cars, and the more cars they make, the more they sell, and therefore General Motors goes up because they make something, or if it doesn't produce something like rent, so you have a house, you rent it out, or you have farmland, you rent it out, that rent comes back over and over and over again and begins to generate its own funds, or even if you buy a handful of corn and you plant it in the ground, what do you get? 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. Like Jesus said, Jesus knew about the
Getting a return.
Getting a return, right? So Warren Buffett basically says, if the thing doesn't produce a return, I'm not interested in it. And so the comparison to rat poison is that it might seem like a good. Rats are drawn to rat poison, right? It's attractive to some people, but it's essentially poisonous at its core or at its root. I think, and Warren Buffett even went on to say that Bitcoin is stupid, evil, and makes a person look bad compared to other people. So those are pretty big claims. So we can, to claim something is evil is a kind of a fascinating claim. It's a theological claim, right? So we can come back to that. But one more in the social construct. I was talking with some friends in this philosophy and wine discussion group, and I think I've mentioned them before. They're good friends and they're super smart people. But one of my friends, as we were talking about this, the philosophy of Bitcoin, we had a whole session on it because I got to pick the session that time. And so we talked about the philosophy of Bitcoin. And one of my friends said, well, isn't it just a Veblen good? So Torsten Veblen was a philosopher. I should have looked up his dates, kind of turn of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. He said that a Veblen good is like a fancy car, a luxury car. It actually gains in value as rich people want them more as a status symbol.
Yeah.
So a Veblen good doesn't necessarily have inherent value, but or maybe it does to a certain extent, but because the rich are buying it, then the price goes up. So is Bitcoin a Veblen good? I think that that there are some properties of Bitcoin. Certainly, as more people buy Bitcoin and more people find out about it, I think generally the wealthy are the ones that are going to learn about things because they're well connected, they're well educated, and yet that's not the way that Bitcoin started, right? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on is Bitcoin a Veblen good?
I think this is go ahead, David.
I want Bitcoin and I'm not rich. There you go.
So I want to point people to a book and then maybe talk a little bit. So Alex Gladstein, author, sort of in the Bitcoin community. I think holds a high up position in the Human Rights Foundation, nonprofit working for human rights around the world. Wrote a book called Check Your Financial Privilege. It's a great book, compilation of some of the articles that he wrote. And in it, he talks all about how us as Westerners don't understand, wealthy Western United States people don't understand what people in other parts of the world are going through and how Bitcoin is a solution for them. That for that person who doesn't have, who is poor, who is oppressed by some sort of government or some sort of other, whatever you want to call them, can actually use this as a means to escape that sort of thing. It's that I can carry my wealth with me through a checkpoint in a hostile territory. And so it's not at all valuable because it's for wealthy people. It's actually value because of the tool that it provides them. So maybe that's leading too far, but he talks great lengths about the tools and the ways in which it helps people who we don't necessarily come into contact with or see on a regular basis.
And I can speak to that. I would like to bridge between what you just said, Jared, and go back to Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett. Where Buffett says The things you want to invest in are X, Y, and Z, things that make money. Assets, in other words. Meanwhile, the American middle class is so crunched right now, not to mention the lower class, not to mention the third world, which is where you just were, Jared. Very much living paycheck to paycheck, dwindling savings accounts. We've seen in this last year that 401ks and other retirement investments have been raided by their owners. So it'd be my wife and I having a 401k. We go to dip into it at penalty so as to make it today, so as to pay the bills today. This is happening at an accelerated rate, the greatest rate we've seen in a while. So it's great for Warren Buffett and the elite, or in his case, to say it's evil, it's ugly, it's not the type of thing you should be investing in. Meanwhile, the rest of us are trying to pay the bills, and then I'll add this next part, and scrape up enough to be able to endure a moderate or low emergency. The water heater breaks, right? There's a leak in the roof. I need to bring a plumber in, electrician. There's things I can do by watching the YouTube videos, and there's things I can't do, and will simply cost money in the moment. And so to check your financial privilege, yeah, you might look at how you can make money with your extra money. Other people are simply trying to figure out how to save a little bit and maintain the purchasing power of what they save. Go back to those third world countries, Jared. The next piece to add to that, which is exactly why Alex Gladstein and the Human Rights Foundation does the work they do, is we're experiencing the purchasing power of our money deflate, at a rate to where I mention it to my friends. I don't like going to the grocery store. I get upset, but I've never woken up from yesterday today to find out that the purchasing power of my dollar has been cut in half in literally less than 24 hours. And yet this is happening around the world. So devil in effect, Ben, sure, there might be some of that, a plaything for the rich. And as one rich person gets their plaything and they look over their fence at the Jones or the McMillans or whoever they are and say that they have a plaything, it might become desirable, but it's distinctly not like that in many ways also, in that, what are we talking here? Rolls Royces, that the value of it day one is $150,000, and now enough of the rich love it, so now it's $250,000. Well, that would be devil in effect. And the price of a Bitcoin today, as we sit, is something like $62,000, $63,000, which is a lot of money, more than most anybody has, your average American, in their savings account. But you don't have to buy one whole unit, right? There's pieces and parts of the Bitcoin. So there's a variety of ways in which that doesn't seem to fit, both with what it looks like to purchase Bitcoin and who it actually helps. This isn't just a plaything, right? Yeah. This is a genuine help to genuine people in a variety of circumstances.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and I think you're absolutely right. Sure there is right now, especially if you look out on we call it crypto Twitter, or X. There are some people out there who are really trying, especially to target messages toward the rich and telling them to get to an X number of Bitcoin because the time that is running out for them to get 1 Bitcoin or 10 Bitcoin or whatever. And yet, so what I want to say is there is, I think, like many of these social construct, it touches on a part of Bitcoin, but it isn't a very robust description of what Bitcoin actually is. We also could go into all kinds of politics, right? Warren Buffett's politics are fascinating because he's a Democrat, and yet he has a lot of money, so he's clearly a capitalist of some sort. But he's very interested in kind of a central bank. He said, "Don't ever bet against America." So he does have maybe some politics that are leading him to make certain arguments, but I'm not interested in the political argument. I'm interested in a philosophical account of what is Bitcoin. So we're going to jump to the next view, which all of the previous discussion around the social construct view, what we've been talking about, this idea that a certain group of people want it, and therefore they get to kind of construct a version of it, or construct a view of it, or construct value for Bitcoin. That view was actually was attacked and kind of undermined by this philosopher named Martin Lipman. Martin Lipman wrote an essay called "On Bitcoin: A Study in Applied Metaphysics," and it just came out recently. I have to look and see when it came out. Yeah, July 2023. So it is not a very old article, less than a year old. And he described. So he has two examples. One is kind of this magic internet money, or he refers to an imaginary unicorn. Let's say that we dream up this imaginary unicorn, and then we go and we sell shares of the imaginary unicorn. Who's going to own it? Well, you can imagine like a snake oil salesman, and a genius marketer could eventually make up a story and like convince people, hey, you should buy a portion of my magic unicorn. And he says that's one thing you can imagine. That is a total social construct view of what this thing is. It's magic internet money. It's made up. And the only reason it has value is because social people, a social group, have constructed value for it. Lippmann says, though, that Bitcoin is a little bit more like Batman. Now, at first, this is kind of a funny argument, but if you think about Batman is copyrighted, right? So Lippmann says he kind of almost grants the like imaginary thing. What is Bitcoin? It's just some numbers, right, in the ether, magic internet money. But he's interested in ownership. So who owns Batman? Well, actually, there's a corporation that owns Batman. DC Comics owns Batman, and if you want to create a Batman story and you put it out there and you try to sell it, you're going to get sued by DC Comics, and they're going to say, no, we own Batman, you do not. And so he makes an argument for Bitcoin based on ownership, and he says that Bitcoin is actually something more than just magic internet money, magic unicorn, buy some shares of my magic unicorn, because real people own it, and real people will pay you money for this, whatever this substance of Bitcoin is, that can be sent around the internet. Let me pause there, and this isn't our final stop, so I'm showing my hand here a little bit, but I will say before we bat this around, what I do love is that a professional philosopher, Martin Lipman, published this article in a very serious philosophical journal called the Philosophical Quarterly, published by Oxford University Press. So this is a very respectable article, and really makes some helpful points. And I'll be honest, when I first read the article, I read it through a couple of times, and I was very impressed at how it takes the argument further down the road of what is Bitcoin. It's not just magic internet money. There's something to this ownership. So let me pause there and kind of hear how is that sitting with you? What does that sound like? What do you like? What do you not like?
That's a. I think if first hearing it, right, it sounds like it's a more developed social construct, right? So he's basically granting it a little bit more footing in reality. That it's not just a craze, that it's not just a mania, that it's not just that tulip thing we were talking about, but that there's some basis in what we might call the real world, right? Because people are willing to, they own it. We could get into the sort of physical nature of it or not, but they own it, and then they're willing to give real dollars for it. But even as I say that, it also almost sounds like very similar to like it's still a very much of a social construct-y sort of thing, where it's a sure they're still willing to give it, but it's only because they value it. So just like I might value Batman versus Iron Man, it's still a self-evaluation thing. So I don't know where you're going, Ben, but I'm imagining it's a hey, this is better if we're trying to find the best story of Bitcoin, but it's not a full picture of what it is. David, I'm curious what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with my own buckets for it. As I think of the unicorn one, both are a legend of sort, right? Unicorn and Batman. We can't trace back, to my knowledge, where the unicorn legend starts from. Nor does anybody have any sort of ownership of it. It is a myth that has flown, right? At the same time, it is a creation. It is that, but again, we can't quite trace it back. It's an unbounded creation. Now I'm using my own words that I'm just thinking on the fly here. Versus Batman, also creation. We can trace it back to an origin. It's this creation that continues to grow, and yet it is, in many ways, as you shared with us, not even going further, but it is much more bounded at the same time. And so when we talk about the value of Batman versus the value of unicorn, it's, I don't know what to call it. It's a network that rises and falls all together in terms of the value. I think there's ramifications for working with it, as much as it's sort of an invention and an idea. It's come down to us in the real world to where I can talk about it as much as I want, but to own a piece of it, I have to, I don't know, enter the network, kind of bow to it. I don't mean that in a theological way, but submit myself to it or something like this. So I don't know fully where the paper goes. I haven't read it, Ben, or where you're going, but those are just, as you've shared with it, I'm saying if somebody had said to me, hey, you're deep into Bitcoin, and there's different kinds of legends, a unicorn-like legend and then a Batman-type legend, and you're going to try and argue that Bitcoin is more like Batman. Start fleshing that out. That's basically all I've done here. Is just a little bit thinking out loud how I begin to flesh both of those out. But take it away, Ben.
All right, so
steer us back.
So
take us forward.
Two books that I've been reading that that I've really learned a lot from, and that have taken me even deeper into this question of what is Bitcoin. And I will say now at this point, I'm not a professional philosopher. So I am just kind of an armchair philosopher. But two books that I think could be really helpful to giving a robust philosophical account for Bitcoin, that I think probably is an article that still needs to be written. So one is, David, you were just talking about network. So this guy, Bruno Latour, Reassembling the Social, an Introduction to Actor Network Theory. Bruno Latour was a French philosopher and just died a few years ago. But but he's actually quite concerned with the way the word social gets used. It's far too ethereal for him. And what he says that we need to do, philosophers, social scientists need to do. So he's kind of attacking this whole idea of a social construct. The word social, it's too fuzzy, it's too vague. David, does kind of what you were just starting to do. He says we need to go in and actually start tracing the network, and not just saying, oh, well, there's this group of people, the social, that assign some value to it. It's that's not good enough for him. He wants us, as we're thinking about a network, he wants us to really start to trace who are actors and how do all these different actors in a network, how do they relate to one another, and he wants us to trace those so that it's not some kind of vague, ethereal thing, but it's much more concrete. And another philosopher that kind of takes Latour's philosophy and pairs it with a lot of kind of metaphysics. There's been a whole debate and a whole conversation around how should we talk about technology in general. And so this Chinese philosopher Yuk Hui, I'll leave some links to all these things. But Yuk Hui writes a book called On the Existence of Digital Objects, which is really an interesting take on kind of a philosophy of technology. So he's interested in, Yuk Hui is interested in these two philosophers. Another French guy, I think in French it would be something like Gilbert Simondon, but people in the Midwest might say Gilbert Simondon. He had this view of technology that was really, he was actually quite amazed by technology, and he was interested in diodes and all kinds of like really geeky stuff and how it worked. And he was writing in the same time as like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze, all these guys that were talking about post-structuralism, postmodernism. So Simondon is not a very well-known philosopher, but he was just fascinated with how over time different technologies come into being, and time is really important. Kind of like Latour, Simondon wants us to trace how technologies come about, and we can only understand them if we have a deep understanding of how over time they came to be. So Yuk Hui pairs that with Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger is another philosopher who was on the other side, kind of classically opposed to technology. So if Simondon was interested in the how did technology get here, Heidegger was interested in the why. And Heidegger's on the question of technologies, it's a pretty biting critique of technology, because technology alienates human beings from each other and from themselves. And technology, Heidegger thinks, doesn't have a lot of good to offer people. So Heidegger would go out for his walks in the Black Forest, and he lived a very, very simple, almost hermit-like life. Kind of classical. We would refer to him today maybe as a Luddite, somebody who's anti-technology. But Hui says what Heidegger was interested in was how technology relates to itself, how it relates to the human being, how it relates to the outside world. He's quite concerned about that, but Hui says at least thinking about how technology relates to the human is really important. So Um, if I've not drowned you yet, here's where I think a philosophy of Bitcoin needs to go. We need to, and I think you guys can kind of fill in these blanks a little bit. So I'll just really broadly sketch out, and then you guys kind of fill in. I think where a philosophy of Bitcoin needs to go is that it needs to take into account how Bitcoin came about. It needs to take into account the actual techniques of it. So the internal stuff of Bitcoin actually matters. The coding, the intentions of the creation of Bitcoin, and some of the first users of Bitcoin really matters. Um, and and I think how Bitcoin as this technology relates to the outside world really matters. And so I'll just tip my hat a little bit that I think um, what the creator of Bitcoin knew inherently, but we've really come to appreciate and understand in kind of some profound ways, is that Bitcoin is, you can't just make it up out of thin air. It's not magic in internet money, a magic unicorn. There's actually a real substance, a real thing, stuff that has to go into Bitcoin, namely electricity to run these miners so that you get Bitcoin spit out after you, and I'm kind of being not very nice to a technical understanding of how Bitcoin works, but it takes stuff in order to make Bitcoin. It takes electricity. In the earliest days, they probably weren't. They were all just mining Bitcoin on their CPU. But eventually, it takes real lots and lots and lots of electricity and lots of the latest technology in order to mine Bitcoin. So there is a very real, very concrete relation of Bitcoin to the real world. So let me pause there and kind of get a sense for what questions you have, or if you're ready to just kind of fill in the blanks, take it down the road. What are you thinking?
It takes a robust origin story, which is what I just heard you say. It's kind of fun going back to the
Right?
Batman.
Love it.
As they tread this ground of different, both Marvel and DC comic myths, one of the things they love to do is do the origin story, right? Go back. Sometimes they redo it, but it takes that origin story. Again, I'm hearing you land in that place, and that does make the Batman story so distinct from unicorns. It just really does. So I'm actually looking forward to reading that article. I wrote down some of your notes in terms of what's required of this. How is it created? The techniques, created to what end? The intent. And I think in that way, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's not magic internet money. In fact, I think in future ones we'll have a chance to explore that more. I understand, first off, the concern about magic internet money. And if we were to stretch that out and see what all is contained there, we're worried about the arbitrary creation of this, the flooding of the system with more of these, right? Some people have access to that initial flood and other people having no access. Based on all those kinds of metrics of magic internet money and what, if we could stretch it, what would fall out, our concerns there. We'll have to demonstrate it in future conversations. But from what we are gathered, I know this about the three of us sitting around this table or this video, that we have the conviction that those concerns do not apply to Bitcoin. Fascinatingly, those very concerns, what do they apply to? They apply very much to the monetary policy of not only our own nation, but of most every nation, since such a time as they became unhinged, unconnected, disconnected, untethered from something in the real world, which goes back to your list of questions that I was writing down. Very much untethered. So, are we concerned about magic internet money? Absolutely. our conviction in Bitcoin does not say of the three of us or a Bitcoin community that we're not concerned about that. Just the opposite. We're so concerned about magic internet money that we're thankful that there is this creation called Bitcoin. And it's worthy of study. We've given it study. We're eager to give it more study, and we would hope our hearers, listeners, those who have been joining us on this little journey thus far, and hopefully a long journey forward, will be interested in that journey precisely because of that concern.
Well said.
I think the what we're getting at, or what at least you propose, Ben, is a philosophy of a sort of a comprehensive story of Bitcoin, right? That we can't just sort of cut to the chase, if you will, like that it's much more than just a one line sentence. It's much more than just a catchphrase. That to really answer the question, what is it? We have to really tell a story, if you will, and that story matters in the way that we tell it too. I'd be curious how you think this would apply to. So Neil Postman is another philosopher, writes a lot about technology.
Yep.
His book Technopoly. It's been a
Using
long time,
ourselves to
but
death.
from what I remember,
Yep.
the point is that technology influences people towards a certain end, and that we need to consider that end when we think about our adoption of said technology. And so I'd be curious if you think how that applies to when we think about philosophy of Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question of why Bitcoin exists, how is it good for humanity or not? I mean, to come back to Warren Buffett's question, is Bitcoin evil? I think it's probably not going too far to say that Heidegger thought that technology was evil, and I think that Postman gets pretty close, right? At least my time with Postman, that's kind of what I've read. I've been kind of working on trying to do a theology of technology that wouldn't necessarily be completely negative. And so here's maybe a theological way that I was thinking about something that was, now I don't know, I've not thought this out completely, so you're getting this very fresh, but I don't want to make a one-to-one comparison here, but I do want to I want to let's dig into kind of the theology of what is an idol. Paul in his epistles, essentially, I think, as I read Paul, what is an idol? Paul leaves it kind of as a question mark. So here's what I mean. He has this question about should we eat food that's been sacrificed to an idol or not, right? And this comes up in a couple of his different epistles, and it is essentially the question kind of gets down to, well, what is this idol, right? If on the one hand, and Paul's kind of, I think he's kind of agnostic on this a little bit. And what I mean by that is he doesn't give a definitive answer. He kind of leaves it as a question mark. On the one hand, some people, Paul says, view the idol essentially as a demon. The idol is evil in itself. So if meat has been sacrificed to an idol, that meat is now demonic. And therefore, some believers, some Christians would say, I'm not going to eat meat that's sacrificed to an idol because it is, by relation, it's demonic. But Paul has this other thing that he's going to argue, which is that for other Christians, if they say, well, what is an idol? And the answer is, an idol is nothing. It is nothing more kind of, Isaiah almost goes this route.
Yep.
What is an idol? It's nothing but a hunk of metal that's like nailed down, and if you don't prop it up right, it's going to fall over. It is nothing but a hunk of junk. And so if you eat meat that's been, quote unquote, dedicated to a hunk of junk, what is that? It's just meat. Eat it. It tastes good, right? Bacon, yummy. And bacon brings in a whole other thing. So we'll go with steak. So Paul, I think, leaves a bit of a question mark as to what is an idol. Some people are convinced, and he kind of leaves it up to conscience. Some people are convinced an idol is evil, it's demonic. Other people say an idol is nothing. And so he leaves the question of whether to eat meat or not as a question mark. Now, what's the comparison? I'm not saying that Bitcoin is like idols, and maybe it's evil or maybe it's nothing. I am definitely not saying that. But I think when it comes to kind of Paul's philosophy of an idol, he actually leaves a third thing. I guess he would have a third answer, and it's in 1 Timothy 4, where he says, anything that is created, and I think we could even extend that to what humans have created, anything that participates in creation, as long as it's as you give thanks for it, and it's taken in faith, then it's good, right? So Paul has kind of a trifold philosophy of stuff, and he's very open to Christians. Kind of, he leaves this question open. I don't know. Does that help? Does that muddy the waters? We got a field for Bitcoin for a second, but I think it does matter.
Oh no, I'm glad to not just talk philosophy, but then talk also theology in this regard. Well, I'll run the danger of bringing you just even one more resource in, because I find it absurd to say technology is bad. I just find it absurd. It is a knife that cuts just simply too deep. It suggests nothing. No way forward for us in our lives, much less humanity. It is a constant reverse. And then in terms of the Christian story, where would it lead us? It would leave us naked in the garden. Yep. Now, meanwhile, in the biblical record, we're told about the promises of what's to come, that on account of the death and resurrection of Christ Jesus, Christ has broken the bounds of death, that he truly rose. And when we say rose from the dead, like lives from the grave, that is the claim, by the way, here is of the Christian faith. And if that be true, then everything's changed. Everything's changed. In what was it, 10, 15 years ago? Who's the Iron Man actor? What's his name?
Oh, yeah. Shoot.
Good golly.
Robert Downey Jr.
You know the actor? Robert Downey Jr. To my mind, the movie that he made that was on his trajectory back in was the detective movie, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, right? And in the first one, the villain, what does the villain do? Rises from the grave. And that's such a great movie. Like, if somebody has risen from the dead, it changes everything. That's the question in that movie, and that is the claim of the Christian faith. Here, wrestle with it, whether you're in the faith or out of the faith, wrestle with it. Did Christ rise from the dead? That's a central claim. If that happened, all else is changed. This risen Christ makes promises of what is to come. And in the revelation of that promise, as a for instance, just one of the things, it talks about the life after this life, the new heavens and the new earth, a city coming down from heaven. I love it. In the picture of this life to come, what is coming down is a city, which is a cultural good. And there is no cultural good without tools, instruments, technology. So I do not find technology inherently bad. Um, but like anything, any tool can be used for harm or for good. We can now trace it back to like dynamite, Nobel, the Peace Prize, all these things. We know this to be true. This is true with the little brother and sister. I'm sure this is true in Jared in your household, right? Some great toy has been used or will be used as a weapon, sibling against sibling, right? It was a gift one day, it's a weapon the next. That has more to say about us than the technology, I would say. So, and where am I going with this? I'm going to go back to where we started. I've been contemplating in this last hour, like a tulip mania, Beanie Babies, Cabbage Patch. These are things that fly by night and they're gone. Individuals will attempt to recreate the next one for personal gain, right? Or corporations might, but none of them stand on the shoulder one or on top of the other. My understanding of technology, meaningful technology, looks at problems in the world and seeks to solve those problems. And then finally, this is always open to a better technology still. It always has sort of that built-in humility. So the book that comes to mind for me that I would recommend is Culture Making by Andy Crouch. It's probably 15 years old now. He talks about this idea of our work and the instruments, the tools, the technologies we use as answering problems in service of our neighbors. And then again, given enough time, creative destruction will be happen and a new and better tool will come. And in the meantime, sinful humans will be walking about who will, in fact, use good tools to bad ends. But for me, that does not make the technology necessarily inherently bad. It's certainly not the whole umbrella of technology.
Amen.
So, David, while you were talking, I was looking to find this Luther quote. And if I've already shared this here, forgive me. I just think it's too good to not bring up back up again. But you're saying exactly what he said, but listen to the tools that Luther uses in this quote. So, he's preaching on the Sermon on the Mount here. He says, just look at your tools, at your needle or thimble, your beer barrel, your goods, your scales or yardstick or measure, and you will read this statement inscribed on them. Everywhere you look, it stares at you. Nothing that you handle every day is so tiny that it does not continually tell you this if you only will listen. And then this is what it's saying. It says, friend, use me in your relations with your neighbor just as you would want your neighbor to use his property in relations with you. And so when we think then about Jesus, what are the two great commandments? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, body, soul, and what? Love your neighbor as yourself. And so we can say, hey, look, tools are to be used for the benefit, for the love of neighbor, how we might want them to use them for us. And so then we think about all of those pet rocks. We think about even Batman, even a magic unicorn. And we can say, hey, look, those are all people trying to make a profit, trying to make a dollar. And that's not necessarily bad. We all need to feed our families and have a roof over our heads. But to say I'm freed from that, to then think about something in a different way, that I can think about something even like Bitcoin, think about it in a way to love my neighbor, to maybe love the neighbors in my house, the neighbors in my church, in whatever place that I am, and that use of technology is going to help me actually enable me to do that. Now, if that's not a compelling case for why we use Bitcoin, man, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I love that, Jared, and I think I want to track down that Luther source. So we'll give that Luther quote as a source as well, because that's a phenomenal quote. And so yeah, this has been a fun conversation. How do we kind of wrap this all up? One point about Bitcoin, and then a wrap up of the gospel. David kind of previewed a little bit of where I'd like to go as we end. But one more thing about Bitcoin and how it relates to the world, how it came into being, is I think very important to understand Bitcoin, if we're going to understand what it is philosophically, we need to understand at the Genesis block, at the first place where Bitcoin was mined. Inscribed in the Genesis block is this quote: "The Times, 3rd January 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks." That statement, put in there by Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, shows some of what Nakamoto's intention for creating Bitcoin was. And so, listener, this comes home real quickly. Somebody is set out to attack or to challenge or to offer, maybe in a nicer way, to offer a better alternative to the central bank. So if you have dollars, US dollars or British pounds, or any monetary instrument that's connected to the International Monetary Fund, which is kind of the central bank of central banks, if you are participating in the money scheme that nation states came up with, Bitcoin was designed to come after and confront and challenge and offer an alternative. So Bitcoin means to essentially touch every human being on the planet. That is the astounding, audacious thing that the creator of Bitcoin put out there. So I think that's important for us to understand what is this Bitcoin. It's a challenge to the monetary system. That's a really big deal. What is the gospel? I think in the same way, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a claim on every human being on the planet. A book that I read a number of years ago really puts it in a nice way, and he kind of does what Bruno Latour wants us to do, which is to kind of do some tracing back to the origins and to understand. There's a lot of people that want to understand Christianity as nothing but just a social construct. A lot of people want to believe that, well, the tomb wasn't empty, Jesus' body was taken away, and maybe it was some kind of psychological dreaming up. Christianity's just made up religion. But Larry Hurtado says that if you trace back the earliest disciples and you see these people that were willing to die for this faith, it only makes sense that something really significant happened to them. That and he knocks down a lot of these kind of, it's just a collective craziness or some kind of thing that the collective dream up. Individuals were willing to die for it, and so Hurtado says there must be. He's being a good historian. He says there must be something out there that happened to these disciples to explain this, and that's as far as Hurtado will go as a historian. As a Christian, Hurtado would say, of course, Jesus really did rise from the dead and really did bodily appear to hundreds of people, and for that reason, they were willing to die for it, for that faith. So, believer, non-believer, all people who are listening or watching this podcast, the resurrection of Jesus relates directly to you because someone rose from the dead, and I think Jesus is worth listening to. With that, we'll wrap it up and look forward to seeing you on another Bitcoin Reformation podcast.